Today we're going to be learning about the subjunctive versus the infinitive tense, and when we use each one appropriately in Spanish. First, we're going to review the subjunctive. So when do we actually use the subjunctive tense? Cuando hay dos personas y no podemos controlar la acción de la otra persona. If we have two people involved, we do not have a say or control as to whether or not that action is going to occur because we cannot control the actions of others. And so that is one circumstance in which the subjunctive is used. Cuando hay duda o no estamos seguros si la acción va a ocurrir. When there is doubt or we are not sure if an action is going to occur, that is an essential piece of when the subjunctive is called into use. Let's look at some examples. Yo espero que tú hagas la tarea. I hope that you do the homework. Although I hope that this is going to happen, I still don't have control as to whether or not that action is going to occur because there are two subjects, yo and tú. Because you are the secondary person, I cannot control your actions, and that is why the verb hacer is conjugated into the subjunctive tense. Es importante que reciclemos para proteger el planeta. It's important that we recycle to protect the planet. I can say it's important that we do this. I can even say it's mandatory. However, I still have doubt as to whether or not that action is going to occur, which is why reciclar is also conjugated into the subjunctive tense. Remember, we need to use a very specific formula when we're trying to form a subjunctive sentence in Spanish. As we know, it does not quite translate word for word as what we use in English, especially since we don't really use the subjunctive mood in English. The formula is as follows. Persona número uno. Un verbo de weirdo en el presente. Que. Persona número dos. Y un verbo en el subjuntivo. Remember, any verb can be used in the subjunctive tense, and when we do use it, we conjugate it to person number two. For weirdo verbs, there is a very specific list as to which verbs can be considered weirdo verbs. Let's look at the example up top to see if it follows the formula. Person number one is yo. Our weirdo verb in the present tense is esperar and is conjugated to person number one in the form of espero. Esperar means to hope, and therefore it falls into the W of weirdo for wishes and wants. We have our que connector. Person number two is tú, and the verb hacer is conjugated in the subjunctive tense according to person number two. So as we can see, our first example perfectly follows the subjunctive formula. So when do we use the infinitive form? So just to review, the infinitive is easily identified by the fact that its original endings of AR, ER, or IR are still intact. The verb is not conjugated and is not being used by any subject. In English, it is typically preceded by the word to. For example, to walk, to talk, to run, to speak. So when do we use the infinitive instead of the subjunctive? Usamos el infinitivo cuando no hay dos personas. If there are not two people, that doubt is not called into question. We are sure as to whether or not the action is going to occur because there's only one person being involved, and that person has complete control as to whether or not that action comes to fruition. Por ejemplo, yo quiero hacer la tarea a las 8. I want to do the homework at 8. Because I am the only person involved, I am not following the formula. There are not two subjects, and therefore there are not two different tenses, and the subjunctive is not being involved at all. You can also see how this works very well in English because it matches the infinitive form of the verb. I want to do. To do is being preceded by the word to, which means that it's in the infinitive form. That's not 100% of the time because in the subjunctive tense in English, a lot of times we do use the infinitive form or the present tense form to express those subjunctive ideas, since as we said earlier, the subjunctive really isn't used that much in English. However, as we can see here, it perfectly matches and it works just as we want it to in English and in Spanish. Usamos el infinitivo con expresiones impersonales sin un sujeto. If we have an impersonal expression, which in Spanish is es plus an adjective plus que, when we do not have a subject that follows it, or que, we do not need to use the subjunctive, and instead we can use the infinitive form. Let's look at an example. Es importante estudiar para el examen. It's important to study for the test. Since there's no other person, for example, if I said it's important that you study for the test, we don't have that other subject of tú in this sentence, and therefore we do not need to use the subjunctive. Again, this follows as we would translate it normally into English. It is important to study. To study indicates that the verb should be in the infinitive form. And once again, this is not 100%. However, as we can see in Spanish and in English, this sentence works really well. Let's go ahead and practice. If you're following along in the video, go ahead and pause in between to try and answer and check and see if you were right afterwards. Es necesario que tú practiques o practicar el español cada día. Subjunctive or infinitive? Practiques. For this example, we're going to be using the subjunctive because, as you can see, after our impersonal expression, we have another subject of tú, which means that we don't know if this action is going to happen, and it gets conjugated in the subjunctive. Yo exijo que ella me escuche o escuchar. Escuche. As you can see, we have two different subjects in this sentence, and therefore we have that loss of control and doubt as to whether or not the action will occur. Es esencial hable o hablar con la directora de la escuela. Hablar. This goes into the infinitive form because we have an impersonal expression, but it is not followed by que or another person, and therefore it is followed by the infinitive. Ella necesita que nosotros lleguemos o llegar temprano. Lleguemos. Because we have two different subjects of ella and nosotros, this is following our formula of a subjunctive clause. ¿Tienes miedo de estés o estar en la oscuridad? Estar. As you can see, we only have one subject here. It's conjugated in the verb for tú. We also do not have the rest of our formula of que or another person. Ella necesita trabaje o trabajar hoy a las 2 de la tarde. Trabajar. Ella is the only subject here in this sentence, and therefore our first conjugated verb is going to be followed by an infinitive verb. I hope you did well on those examples. Let's quickly just review the rules before we end. For the subjunctive, it always follows the formula. That formula, just to review, is person 1 plus weirdo verb in the present plus que plus subject 2 and plus any verb conjugated in the subjunctive. Infinitive clauses do not follow that formula. In the subjunctive, there are two people, and therefore we lose control as to whether or not the action is going to occur. In the infinitive, there's typically only one person involved. For the subjunctive, the impersonal expression has que plus another person. And in the infinitive, the impersonal expression does not have que or another person involved at all. I hope that helped you learn as to when to identify when to use the subjunctive or the infinitive in Spanish.